How to Train a Happy Mind is a production of the nonprofit Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment. Our podcasts and programs are free and ad-free thanks to our generous donors. To support us now, visit our website at howtotrainahappymind.org. We accept cash, credit, Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrencies, and your donations are tax-deductible in the U.S. On the website, you can also find links to purchase the book based on the podcast, How to Train a Happy Mind, with a foreword by the Dalai Lama. There you can also join our Train a Happy Mind community that meets weekly for lectures, meditations, and discussions. I'm Scott Snibbe, and this is How to Train a Happy Mind. For the end of the year, we're bringing back one of my favorite guests, Tenzin Chogkyi, who's now one of the teachers guiding meditations from time to time in our Train a Happy Mind community. Tenzin Chogkyi has been a practicing Buddhist since the 1970s. She spent 20 years as a Buddhist nun, ordained by His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself. In fact, that's the reason why she shares her first name, Tenzin, with His Holiness. She's also one of the most thoughtful, independent thinkers I know, and a person of extraordinary integrity who has dedicated her life to both inner development and advancing fairness and equality in the outer world. We got together to record this episode for the end of the year on self-compassion, how we can each build a loving relationship first and foremost to ourselves, which becomes the foundation for a happy, meaningful life with those around us. So Tenzin Chogkyi, it's a delight to have you back on How to Train a Happy Mind. We also changed the name recently after 168 episodes to a happier.
It's always good to get a fresh start from time to time, isn't it?
Absolutely. So yeah, we're talking about self-compassion, and I can answer the same question if you want. But was there a time in your life you felt you lacked self-compassion for yourself?
Until about 15 years ago. I mean, really.
Oh no.
I really struggled. I have struggled a lot. And I luckily had a conversation with my father before he passed away about this. But you heard a lot more about what you didn't do right than you did what you did right. And so I think I really internalized that a lot and had a very, very harsh inner critic that I struggled with. And the turnaround for me came when I was in long meditation retreat. And I found that my harsh inner critic also really projected outward. And I had so much criticism and judgment towards others. And so I kind of had an epiphany that self-kindness and self-forgiveness would heal both my own self-criticism and my judgmental mind. And it really worked in accepting the parts of myself that I was rejecting, magically kind of really tempered that judgmental, critical mind that was focused outward too. So it was really the pain of my harsh inner critic and my outward judgment that really shifted things.
Yeah, it's funny that growing up, I remember my dad used to send me to go look for something in his shop, his kind of disorganized shop. He's like, get me the swizzle swazzle. And I'd be like, okay. And then I'd be looking. And then I'd come back. I was like, I couldn't find it. He's like, it was right on that shelf, the third shelf. I was like, I looked on the third shelf. Then he'd come with me. And he's like, it was right here. It was like on the second shelf. He's like, what are you, a complete idiot?
Right.
So I remember hearing that all the time and thinking like, no, I'm not a complete idiot. But it's messages like that when you're young.
That's right.
I think those things start to pile up.
Right? Yeah, they really do. And my poor dad, like when I talked to him about it, and he really hadn't understood the impact of those kind of things. And he said, oh, I was just kind of trying to be a good dad. I thought that was my job as a father to kind of correct you. But I ended up with this intense kind of imposter syndrome of like people would see me as capable and confident and blah, 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 and all the things. And For the longest time, I had this story of like, oh, if they only knew. It's not just us, Scott.
Yeah.
Obviously, many people from our
Yeah.
culture have the same kind of
Yeah.
struggle. Yeah.
So for a person who doesn't feel self-compassion for themselves right now, can you paint a picture of what it feels like in your head as you go through your day? Because we're saying something to ourselves all day long.
I think sometimes those self-critical voices combine a little bit when we start studying Buddhism. I remember our teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, used to say things like, don't waste even an instant of this precious human rebirth. And so our culture, not only do we have that harsh inner critic often from our upbringing, but our culture has this very strong kind of like Protestant work
Mm-hmm.
ethic. Like you can't really be a virtuous person if you're having too good of a time. You need to be sort of striving and
Mm-hmm.
pushing. And I think for me, it's been a question of becoming aware of that and providing the counter narrative to that through a lot of deep investigation of some of these narratives and stories that are part of my culture and part of
Mm-hmm.
my upbringing, going, it's okay to rest. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to prioritize connection, and Master Shantideva's teaching the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. And him, one of the things that I love that he says is kind of use your joy as a litmus test of if you're still benefiting beings and feeling joyful about it. But when you lose your joy, then you need to rest. There's a researcher, Kristen Neff, who's
Mm-hmm.
devoted her whole career to self-compassion. And so, one of the biggest obstacles that she found in the research of why people don't practice self kindness and self compassion is because we think we need that harsh inner critic to motivate us.
Yeah.
And she's found that's not true at all because it discourages us. And she uses this great analogy of like you have a middle school student who comes home with a failing math grade. What is going to motivate them more? If you shout at them and just go, you're such an idiot,
Mm.
you're always going to be a failure. Or if you say, hey, I've got your back, we're in this together, I'll get you a tutor, we'll make it through. And she goes, why would we think it would be any different, our own self-talk? And they found through the research how discouraging. But that's one of the reasons we won't let it go, because we
Mm.
think it motivates us to succeed.
Like a coach.
Yeah,
My daughter's really
exactly.
good at that. My daughter's always, she's very funny, and she's like, you can do it. This is what you trained for. She's always
Oh,
saying stuff like,
that's so cute. Does she get that in school? Like, yeah, I'm curious because you have this young daughter.
I mean, luckily she has gone to schools that are very socially, emotionally intelligent. And of course we try, very
Yeah.
hard to stay like constructive. And, when I learned some of this from Richard Prince, who's really
Oh,
great with
yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
And to start, like, the best thing you can do really is like, even if a kid's done something, quote, wrong, it's like, oh, what's okay, you're feeling bad. Like, you can tell when a kid's done something wrong, they also actually feel really bad about it usually. So like there's no
Yeah,
reason to make
that's
them
right.
feel worse.
And one of the things both Kristen Neff and Paul Gilbert have found is just thinking that self-criticism is a motivator,
Yeah.
thinking that self-compassion means selfishness, thinking that it's weakness. Those are some of the things that come up a lot that people resist doing it. But the research has been really consistent and then showing that it's not a motivator at all. So yeah, that's kind of consistent across the research. Yeah.
You know what shocked me is that I gave a lecture kind of on self-compassion recently in a Buddhist center in Santa Fe. And I
Yeah.
got a lot of pushback from like this
Ah,
guy who just interrupted the whole talk and said, I don't want to be happy. He's like, and
yeah.
I've encountered that
Oh,
there's usually
right.
one or two
Right.
people every once in a while in meditation. They're like, I don't want to be happy, and these are people who are Buddhists too. They're people who call themselves Buddhists. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
even
yeah.
as a Buddhist, to have this kind of self-flagellating, like, I don't want to
Yeah,
be happy. I
absolutely.
mean, have you
Yeah.
encountered that with any
Oh,
of
a
your
hundred
students?
percent. Like definitely. And we're hearing the word happiness and we feel either undeserving of it or we feel that it's worldly and a distraction. And we're not looking deeper into what the real causes of that more deep, genuine well-being
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, sometimes, you can word. I had this long debate with this guy. It kind of derailed the whole lecture, but it was interesting because he was,
Huh.
I was
And
like,
what was he saying about his
well, he's like,
resistance to
oh, he's
happiness?
like, I don't want to be happy. He's like, I want to achieve, the stages of the path and things like that. But I was like, well, I'm not sure you can achieve them without being happy. And
Right.
but I was kind of like, it was so, because I said, gosh, as a Buddhist, it's
Yeah.
like, it's odd for many of us. It's the very first thought we have when we wake up is like, may all beings be happy. Like
Right.
and
That's right.
so then I went and researched a little later. I was like, am I like missing something? And I find, His Holiness the Dalai Lama writes an article. The purpose of our life is to be happy.
Yeah. That's
Like
right.
he
That's
couldn't
right.
have said it more clearly. But where does self compassion fit on the Buddhist path?
It reminds me, Scott, of this conversation I had. So it was many years ago, and I've never forgotten this. I was teaching a big introductory class on Buddhism in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightened. And it was 50 or 60 people, this big 10-day intro class, and people from all different countries and all different cultures. And I remember saying something about how in the Buddhist scriptural languages, there wasn't a word that exactly corresponded to the idea of shame or guilt.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this one Brazilian guy who's still a friend of mine, and he raised his hand and goes, I don't believe they didn't have shame and guilt. We got into this big discussion, and one of the students said, oh, when you feel like you've done something wrong and done something harmful, how do you feel? And I remember there was this woman there from Korea, and she said, oh, I just feel like inside I'm really a Buddha and I just made a mistake. And the Brazilian guy's like, you what? Excuse me? So we got into this kind of conversation about what is our feeling of what human nature is, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
original sin idea versus, as Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche called it, original goodness. I remember one time I was teaching in Australia, this is many years ago, for a while. And this one older woman, she was older than me, about 10 years older than me. And this is a while ago, asked to see me to talk about her practice. And so we met the day after my teaching, and I'd never met her before. And she just looks at me and she just goes, last night in the teaching, you said that it's okay to be happy. And she goes, is it really okay to be happy? And my heart just broke. It was like, oh my God, she's like 65 and she just never felt like it was really okay. And then I go, I'm flying back to New Zealand tomorrow. I may never see this woman again. I kind of grab her by the shoulders and I get really close to her. I was like, I need to give her the message right now. And I just was like, it's really okay to be happy. It's really
Yeah.
okay. She's kind of nodding at me. And I was just like, like, it's okay, because she'd spent her whole life serving others and probably feeling like it was selfish to do anything for herself beyond the most basic self-care to keep herself alive so she could serve her
Mm-hmm.
family. And it's beautiful. That service is gorgeous and beautiful. And one of the problems is it's not really sustainable unless we balance it with some self-care and self-compassion. And I try and get that across.
Yeah, it's real. My wife's often very surprised by how I spend my time because I get a lot done. I'm generally a very productive
Yeah.
person, but she's often quite surprised because, like, if I'm tired, I just go take a nap. Like, I'll take it. So if I'm really tired, I'll take a nap after lunch for 2 hours or something. She's like, "What? You do that?" I was like, "Yeah, if you're tired, take a nap." Or like if I
Yeah.
get too much work, I'll like take a day off and go spend the whole day with a friend. She's like, "What? You just?" But
How have you I'd love to
oh
hear
yeah,
about that for you. Like, what's been your journey that you can even allow yourself to do that? Because, like, you must have done some transformative work to feel that it's okay to do that, because so many
yeah.
people don't. And,
Well,
like, on a surprise that you do that, I'm
yeah.
kind of curious too how you've worked with this topic of self-compassion.
I really got it from my parents because my
Ah,
my parents, they both had very overbearing parents. Like my dad's father was a
mhm.
very powerful architect and wanted him to become an architect. My mom's parents are kind of like Jews that became, managed to like crawl to have a beautiful
Yeah,
bourgeois existence in New York and really wanted her to be kind of proper and,
yeah,
like follow all the rules and be an upstanding New Yorker.
right.
But they wanted to be artists and creative. So they always told us as kids, whatever you do with your life, we're fine with it. Whether you
Oh,
become a truck
beautiful.
driver or a professor, like whatever you do, it's fine. And they also taught us to really relax too. They did.
Oh,
My parents,
nice.
I mean, to a level that I never do. Like, we never even went on a hike when we were kids. Like, when we went to nature, we would just sit on the edge of a lake like for 8 hours and just sit there and watch dragonflies and have sandwiches. Like, my parents are really, really good.
Oh,
I think children
yeah.
of the 60s, they're in general, they're pretty good at hanging out.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think
yeah.
they taught me those skills,
Mm,
and I passed them on to my. It's so mind blowing. Like, the role that I play for a lot of people in life is so funny. Like you were saying, just giving them permission. I remember my girlfriend in college. She was on like a pre-med track to become a doctor. I think her parents wanted her to become
yeah.
a doctor, and like I was taking animation classes at the art school next door, and she's like, "Oh, that seems really fun." I was like, "I could see doing that." And then she took a class and liked it, and she's like, "Oh gosh, I wish I could go to art school." And I said, "You're an adult." I was like, "You can do it. You can transfer and go to art school." And she's like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." And then she did it. She transferred, and then she became it. Her whole career. But
Amazing.
it's really
Yeah.
funny. So much of my life, I find like people just need. It's bizarre. They need somebody, and we do live in a very hierarchical, authoritarian, patriarchal,
Yeah.
whatever. A lot of those words we use today, but it's bizarre how you can just, like, I'm not their authority, but somebody, they just need to hear from somebody like, "Hey, take the day off, like,
Yeah.
relax, life's
Oh, I
precious."
mean, my student that I was talking to earlier this
Yeah.
week, then he left me a message saying, I just called my family and told them that I had your permission to take a break. And I was just like, wait, that was what happened in that conversation? Like, I wasn't thinking that he was needing my permission. I was just encouraging him, hey, you're burning out and, you've got these health things going on and you need to take care of yourself. And if you have this longing to do retreat and just put everything on pause for a while, do it. But he really, like you said, we kind of feel we need permission from some authority to even do that, which I didn't even realize was happening in that conversation. Isn't it
Oh
funny?
yeah, yeah. But the other thing is also just like a different, even before I was a Buddhist, to have a little bit more of like a different sense of yourself. Like, I had a really hard driving advisor in college. Like, I worked in this
Mm,
research lab, and he was just like 100% effort. Just if you're,
yeah,
just work. If you just
yeah,
work harder. So that was the place where I started like, pulling all nighters. Like, he'd be like, "We have this
yeah.
meeting, on Monday. You got to stay up all night." And I'd stay up all night trying to fix something in computer code. It wouldn't work.
Mm,
Finally go to sleep, just sleep a couple hours, wake up, and I had the answer. And so I
yes.
realized, like, wait a minute, like, there's never a point to do this. Like, go to bed at a normal time, get a full night's sleep,
Yeah,
and you
that's
just
right.
wake up with the answer. But it requires like starting to see a different sense of yourself, that it's
Mm,
not the
mm,
like, you're more like managing some kind of amorphous team, of
yeah,
yourself, right?
yeah,
That
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that your
yeah.
mind works in mysterious ways. Your body, like, you need to give it good foods, give it rest, and then it surprises you too.
That's right.
Take time off, relax, have fun
And
with
I think it's
friends.
sort of, yeah, exactly what you say. Our attitude towards ourselves, kind of like that original sin versus original goodness. Like, and that's something I'm learning over the course of my spiritual life is if I allow more space for that original goodness to just become
Mhm.
manifest rather than trying to fix myself. I think I started the spiritual path just going like, oh, I've got all these things I want to fix and become kinder and become wiser and I was just a project that I needed like a total overhaul. Like I was a total fixer upper, that was just gotten cheap on the market because I was such a fixer upper, you know. But over time, just kind of going, oh, I need space to actually allow. Because sometimes I think we get so striving and so busy because we're afraid if we allow space to listen, we're afraid of what we're going to hear. Instead of trusting that if we allow the space, what we're actually going to hear is the inner wisdom and the inner kindness and the inner compassion. And so it takes a little bit more of that trust.
That's a very good point. I heard something kind of sad, both about Donald Trump and Elon Musk, that they can't stand to be alone. Like they have to always be with another person. And,
Oh,
that's this, I think, and I think we all feel that, at
yeah.
sometimes, like, but it's really, really critical to have that
Wow.
time by yourself
Yeah.
and to be gentle with yourself and to start seeing, yeah, what are some of the things I want to let go of? What are the things I want to cultivate? What even am I? Asking that question, who
Yeah.
am I? Because I think of course, it'd be quite scary, I think, for either of them to confront those questions because
All
it's
of
so
those. Yeah.
externally they don't even probably know what they are anymore because there's so much projection from outside of
Yeah,
like a
that's right.
caricature, like a
Oh,
character
it's
they're
so
playing, right?
sad. I mean, it's so tragic. And I think that's a big part. Like for me, the other day, I felt some things bubbling up. And my self compassion practice was taking my journal and a cup of coffee and sitting outside on my deck and just journaling for a while and
Mm,
letting these things emerge. And I think sometimes, like one other thing about self compassion that I think makes us suspicious, there's a lot of talk about self care. A lot of social justice activists nowadays are also talking about community care because they say in our hyper individualized society, often we only think of self compassion and self care as an individual project, and we're not seeing it as a community project and something
mm,
that's in relation to others. And so widening and so understanding that's part of self compassion and self care too, is our connection. I was in a meeting once. The local hospice here in Santa Cruz had meetings periodically before COVID of different faith leaders who were doing end of life care in the community. And there was these beautiful meetings that we'd all get together and then they would sometimes have a certain presentation. And I remember one of the meetings was on the topic of resilience and self-care. Like, what do you do to take care of yourselves? And we're having like a brainstorm of the faith leaders were calling out, the things that they did and they're writing on the flip charts. And there was 2 or 3 pages of take a walk, meditate, take a nap, and none of it was relational. And finally,
mm.
by the third flip chart page, I raised my hand and I said, do any of you find that some of your self-care practices is like being with your friends and being in connection to others?
Yeah.
And then the light bulb kind of went off. And even for the faith leaders, it wasn't their go-to self-compassion strategy
Hmm.
is be with friends that really see you and get you, and not in a Donald Trump, Elon Musk way, but
Yeah.
like feel that sense of connection. And with our hyper individualized, I mean, even for us, so often our spiritual paths can be so isolated and
Hmm.
individualistic. And I often say, I think for Westerners, we take refuge in the two jewels of Buddha and Dharma. And then the Sangha jewel, the community jewel, we just bypass altogether. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, that's in there. We'll recite it when we're reciting the prayers, but we're not really engaging in connection and community. So I think that's a
Mm.
very overlooked aspect of self kindness and self compassion and self care, and builds our resilience, feeling like we're not going through this alone.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my practices I don't give up. It's another one my wife's kind of
Mm.
surprised because like a couple times a week I'll make time to see a friend or dharma friend.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's a friend or dharma friend, but
Yeah.
somebody who, you really care about. There's a wonderful definition of friendship I saw recently, which is a person who you spend time with like for no reason. Like just because
Oh,
it's
that's
not
awesome. I
like
love
there's no
that.
agenda, there's
There's
no
no project.
transaction, there's
There's
no
no
project,
agenda.
like, and I think there's really something to that. It's to listen to each other, to be there. And I always find I feel so nourished. I also sleep
Oh,
so well, like on the nights like that we
oh,
had like a nice dinner party with some friends over. I notice like I
yeah.
sleep so soundly and I feel so good
Yeah.
the next
Yeah,
day.
community care. I
So
mean, I was talking to a friend who had lost a relative recently, and they lived in this small town, and it reminded me of like my grandparents, where my grandparents lived, because suddenly everybody starts showing up with
mhm.
casseroles because there's been a loss, and of course you're not going to spend your time cooking, you're grieving, and then the whole community shows up, and we've just kind of lost that community care. And one of my other, I'm just such a big fan of Vivek Murthy, the
Mm,
Surgeon General, and he does a lot of work about loneliness because when
mm,
he became Surgeon General first under President Obama, he and his team went out to try and find the biggest, kind of healthcare needs. And he thought it was going to be combating obesity or opioid epidemic or smoking cessation or something. And he found an epidemic of loneliness. And so he spent a lot of time thinking about it and wrote this book called Together,
mm.
which is all about how many, I mean, a huge, huge percentage, shocking percentages of Americans at least feel they don't even have one person who really is somebody they can turn to. So you're prioritizing that in your own life of the people who there isn't an agenda around. It's like, that's somebody who just gets me and sees me and has my back.
I remember reading quite some time ago that the majority of men over 40 in the United States have no friends. They have zero friends,
Yeah.
which just
Yeah.
broke my heart. And it
Isn't
explains a
that
lot. It explains a
unbelievable?
lot of the
Yeah.
suffering and pornography and
Oh,
violence and all
yeah.
the different things that make people even less
Yeah.
happy.
Wow. Wow. I remember a friend of mine early on, and it was before I was a monastic. I practiced as a monastic for about 20 years. And I remember early on in my Buddhist study, I met this Australian monk and we got to be friends and we were talking. And he said, he felt like a lot of monks gave up their vows and got into a relationship. And he goes, it's not about sex, it's about connection. Because he goes, for so many men, their intimate partner is the only person they talk to about their life and their feelings. And when you get ordained as a monk and you don't have that intimate partner, he goes, I've lived in monasteries with other men my age. They don't know a thing about what's going on for me. They don't know anything about my life. We don't have that level of connection, and it's just too lonely. So you give up your vows to get into a relationship, mostly just because of your need for connection. And I've never forgotten him saying that. It was just, and it sort of goes
Mm.
along with what you say about, people who are socialized male, at least in the past, for sure, I think felt, yeah, maybe suspicious of connection of other men, or it just wasn't anything that they'd had modeled for them in any kind of healthy way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk just a little bit about practicing self-compassion? Like there's on the cushion, there's in everyday life. Can you talk about, like, for people who want to practice this, is there some very simple
Mm,
ways, simple meditations, simple ways of thinking
yeah.
in everyday life that, you can start to become habits?
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I like a lot in the meditation that I led, that will be
Mhm.
part of the recording that kind of accompanies this interview, is one I learned from Kristen Neff, and she calls it a self-compassion break. And it has the three elements of self-compassion she identifies that I really like. And one of the things she suggests, and there's some physiology that goes along with this that has to do with the vagus nerve. She says, do something physical like putting your hands on your
Mm.
chest, even cupping your face, even like putting your hands on your forehead or giving yourself a hug. And she said, there's something about that that enables the self-compassion to work even better.
Mm.
And so I love teaching this practice because you can do it really quickly.
Mm.
And then another one that I really like to emphasize for people is kind of attuning to the somatic sense of what gives you joy or what's energizing. Our mutual friend, Venerable Tenzin Chogkyi, often says, we've got to quit shooting ourselves. And so when you kind of feel like you're pushing against resistance to do something that you feel that you should do, like really listen to what your body is telling you about what you need. And if you need to take a nap, if your body is just saying, hey, I need to lie down for an hour, and attuning to what gives us joy and what gives us energy. And I really recommend people doing that, when they're making decisions. Like sometimes people will say, oh, I really want to serve. What's best? Is it like hospice or prison work or kids or this or that? And I go, what? gives you energy, like what enlivens you, what energizes you, and paying attention to that, because I think we have so much wisdom about what we need. And that's the practice of self-compassion too, is just to get used to, first of all, attuning to that somatic felt sense, and then feeling like it's okay, giving yourself permission to follow whatever that is. One of my favorite quotes, there was a civil rights activist called Howard Thurman, who is also a Protestant minister. And he said, don't ask the world what the world needs. Ask what you need to come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive.
That's really, really wise.
Yeah.
Do you ever see? We're painting a bit of a rosy picture now, a little bit. Even it is quite difficult actually to practice.
Yes.
Where do you see these practices fail for people? Like where are they not working, and then what do people do?
Yeah, that's
when
right.
they don't?
I mean, I think really understanding that self-compassion is not, well, it's not even self-esteem, because psychologists are really falling out of love with the idea of self-esteem, because it still means you have to be worthy in some way and that you've produced something. So self-compassion isn't the same as self-esteem. It's not the same as self-pity. People resist because they think it's going to be self-pity or self-absorption, or it's going to make me, kind of sorry for myself if I'm self-compassionate. That it's not either selfishness or weakness.
That's the hardest one,
Yeah.
really, because we are in the society of, boys don't cry, be a good girl, like
Yeah,
don't
that's right.
show your weaknesses. So,
Yeah.
well, you're going to lead this meditation. You led it for our community, and you're going to lead them. We're going to play it in the next episode.
Oh, nice.
This
Yeah.
Kristen Neff
Yeah.
self-compassion meditation. So I'm looking forward to doing it. Is there anything else you'd like to say about self-compassion?
Oh, thank you so much for, inviting me to have this conversation. I always love being in conversation with you. And I just love hearing your own journey about self-compassion and, how you've kind of related to it. I always learn something new whenever I have a conversation with you. So it's like my last message is the one I had for the women in Australia. It's really okay to be happy. It's really okay to be happy. And allow ourselves the happiness that we wish for and that we deserve.
Oh, great. Well, Tenzin Chogkyi, thank you again for another wonderful conversation. And now for, helping our community, leading meditations, and all the great work you do in the world.
Thank you so much, Scott. It was a great pleasure to be in conversation.
Thanks. Thanks for joining me for my interview with Tenzin Chogkyi on self-compassion. If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy the book based on our podcast's modern approach to Buddhist wisdom, How to Train a Happy Mind. You can find it in paper, ebook, and audiobook anywhere you buy books. If you'd like to go deeper in your meditation practice and find like-minded people interested in talking about the ideas discussed in the podcast, go to howtotrainahappymind.org to sign up for our newsletter and join our Train a Happy Mind community that offers weekly lectures, meditations, classes, and discussions. If it's possible for you, please also consider making a donation to our podcast. How to Train a Happy Mind is a nonprofit project of a skeptic's path to enlightenment. Our podcasts and programs are free and ad-free thanks to our generous donors. To support us now, visit our website at howtotrainahappymind.org. We accept cash, credit, Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrencies, and your donations are tax-deductible in the U.S. Thanks to Christian Parry for mastering this episode and Isabella Acebal for marketing. We wish you a wonderful day.